Okay, I suggest we start. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Startup School webinar on the topic of leveraging ChatGPT. This will be a difficult word for me this evening for business development. So what we want to do today is to actually share with you some use cases on how you can use ChatGPT in your daily business activities. So let me briefly show you the objective of today. So what we want to do is to give you a better understanding about what you can do with ChatGPT and other generative AI tools in a responsible manner, of course. And more specifically, I want to show you a number of use cases. So I will show you how you can use ChatGPT to conduct customer interviews. I will actually show you how you can use ChatGPT to negotiate and simulate contracts. And then I will show you how you can identify and analyze competitors with Bing Chat, Trustpilot, and again, ChatGPT. Then I will talk briefly about agents, and I will show you the lean startup agents that I developed. And finally, the final use case will be about how you can generate insights from audio and transcripts using tools like Whisper AI, ChatGPT, and Midjouney. How will we organize this webinar? I will do kind of a talk for like 45-50 minutes. We have not enabled the chat because there are quite some people in the webinar, so that would be a bit too chaotic, but you can start asking questions in the Q&A option. So in Zoom somewhere, you should see a button called Q&A, and so there you can post questions. And after I finish my talk, we will take some questions. So Niklas, my great assistant for this evening, will then pick some questions and we can discuss them so that you also have the opportunity to engage a bit in a discussion. We are recording the webinar because afterwards we want to publish it on YouTube. We got quite some requests for recording because not everybody could make it this evening. So that's why we are recording it. And we will also email the slides to all the participants via the email address that you used to register for this webinar. So every participant will receive the slides that I will show you this evening. Before we start, maybe briefly something about myself. Of course, we have a lot of people from the WHU network, so I hope they already know me. But for the people that are not from the WHU network, so I'm Dries Faems. I'm the Professor of Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technological Transformation at WHU. I'm also the Academic Director of the Entrepreneurship Center. And so the Entrepreneurship Center organizes on a regular basis startup school evenings, where we most of the time invite experts to come and talk about a particular topic that is relevant for entrepreneurship and startups. But today we decided to organize a webinar ourselves because I have been experimenting quite a lot with ChatGPT, and we see that there is actually a lot of requests for sharing knowledge on this topic. So that's what we will try to do this evening, simply to show you some use cases that I use nowadays in my day-to-day activities as professor at WHU, and that might be relevant also for you. Okay, so I think given that we have like 1 hour, I don't want to waste too much time. So my suggestion is to just kick it off. And actually, today we talk about ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. And a very important part of using that kind of tools is what we call prompting. So when you use this kind of tools, you will have to prompt an input into the generative AI tool to make it generating an output. And actually, the quality of the output of ChatGPT heavily depends on the input that you give. That's always shitty data in, shitty data out. So it's very important to do a good prompt to stimulate ChatGPT to come up with a high quality response. And based on my own experience, but also on kind of the recommendations that you can find nowadays on LinkedIn, Twitter, I've here made a small overview of some recommendations on how you can generate a good prompt. And so one thing that is very important is that you clearly stipulate the identity that ChatGPT has to answer your question. Yeah, so is ChatGPT a marketing expert? Is it a lawyer? Is it a business guru? Be clear about what is actually the identity of ChatGPT. And you also have to be clear about your own identity. So who are you? And what kind of answer do you expect? And then, of course, you need to clearly also define the expected output. What do you want to get from ChatGPT? And it also makes sense to clearly stipulate in which kind of format ChatGPT should report the output, because that can be very helpful. And if necessary, you can also give it a direction in which kind of information it should use. Finally, and I think this is a very important part, and I will not go into the technical details, but you need to realize that ChatGPT has been trained in a very specific way. Yeah? So ChatGPT is a language model. That means it's a kind of statistical model that is very good in predicting the next word in a sentence. That's how it's trained. And that also explains why ChatGPT really loves language tasks. Yeah? So if you give ChatGPT instructions like translate, summarize, categorize, or find similar descriptions, ChatGPT tends to be very good in that kind of tasks, whereas ChatGPT hates tasks like search for factual information, because that's not how ChatGPT is trained. ChatGPT is not a web crawler that searches for information on the internet. ChatGPT is a statistical model predicting the next word in a sentence. So if you want to retrieve factual information, typically ChatGPT is not really the accurate tool to use, but nowadays, and I will show you a bit what is possible, new alternative tools are emerging that can address this limitation. So these are essential parts of a good prompt, and let us simply illustrate this with a first use case, and we will start today quite straightforward, and as we go along the use cases, I will make it a bit more complex. But so a first use case that I want to share with you is about doing customer interviews. So I'm the entrepreneurship professor at WHU. So I teach a lot of entrepreneurship courses where our students have to build startups or at least business models. And what we learn our students is that they need to start from a problem, not a solution. So the core starting point for a good business model is an interesting problem worth solving. That also means that you need to get a very good understanding about how customers are suffering from the problem that you have identified. So you want to get a really good fine-grained understanding about how customers are kind of experiencing the problem that you have identified. And in our entrepreneurship courses, we use a specific technique called the MUM test. And so these are a set of questions that you can ask customers to get a much better understanding of the pain points that the customer is having. And traditionally, we kind of forced our students to go out of the building and get in touch with real people that are potential customers and do interviews. But of course, that was always very time consuming. And in our courses, we don't have that much time. So it was always a bit of a hassle. And so recently, we actually started using ChatGPT as an alternative. So we actually use ChatGPT as the customer, and the students need to do an interview with ChatGPT. And let me illustrate how that goes. So actually, let me go to the OpenAI interface. So I will just open now a new OpenAI interface. You all know that, of course. So this is the OpenAI interface. Now I have access to GPT-4, so I have a subscription. Now this kind of stuff you can definitely also do with GPT 3.5. But so let us exercise, or let us do the prompting that I told you. Yeah? So we have to be clear about what is the identity of ChatGPT. So in this case, we'll say, you are a family of 2 adults and 2 children. Yeah? So imagine that we want to talk and we see our customer as a family of 2 adults and 2 children that live in a house in the city. Yeah. So now GPT knows who he should act. He needs to act like a family. And so who am I? So I am a founder that is willing to create a startup related to the topic of monitoring and paying energy bills. And that's an important topic nowadays for everybody. So now ChatGPT knows who I am. So what is now the expected output? So now you can say, I want to interview you about the pain points that you experience in paying energy bills. Yeah, so that's what I want to get. And how do I want to get the output? I want to get it now in a conversational style because I want to engage in a conversation with you. Please report in a conversational style. So that's, and now we can ask him a very specific question. For instance, what is for you the hardest part about paying energy bills? Yeah, so now we have formulated a prompt in a quite specific way. So now I can press enter, and now ChatGPT will start giving me an answer. So he's saying, okay, I'm now will be a hypothetical family of 2 adults and 2 children. And now they start kind of engaging a conversation. Yeah? So they are happy to help me with my research. Paying energy bills can indeed be a hassle. And now you see that they start talking about pain points. So it's difficult for them to manage energy uses in real time. We don't have an easy way to track how much energy we're using in a given day of the week. Sometimes the bills themselves can be hard to understand. So you see, they actually now produce a lot of problems. And then you can, of course, continue the conversation. And then the good thing is, the moment that you have initiated the conversation, then actually it will be easier to prompt. Then you can just ask additional questions. So now we can, for instance, we can ask, why is it so difficult to monitor your energy bills in real time? And then you will see, he thinks that I asked a good question. I'm very happy about that. And now he starts talking about traditional energy providers that don't provide real time. And so now we go even deeper into a particular problem, having a conversation. Yeah? And so you see that typically he will even give a number of reasons. And so there is now a second reason. And so in that way, you can actually generate quite an in-depth conversation with a hypothetical customer. And I think this is not only relevant in the case of startups, but I think it's also relevant for established companies that want to get a better understanding about what are their customers experiencing, are there particular pain points that they could address. And so definitely as a first step, instead of immediately going out and talk with customers, you can actually frame ChatGPT as your customer and start at least doing a first exploration about potential answers that you're getting. And I'm not saying that this replaces talking with real customers, but I think it's a very good first training before you really go outside of the building and approach real customers, because I think this will already give you quite some interesting information. Yeah, so that's just a first use case that I wanted to show, to also show you the importance of doing good prompting and how you can actually, with a good prompt, get very rich information out of ChatGPT that at least at first sight makes a lot of sense. Good, then let's push this a bit further. And I want to show you another use case. So I'm teaching in the Executive MBA of WHU, where I teach course on collaboration for innovation. So it's a course where together with the students, we discuss about how can companies collaborate together. And one aspect that we discuss is the negotiation of partnership contracts. Yeah? So if you collaborate with other partners, you typically have to negotiate a contract. And a case that I use in my course is a case between 2 companies called Jet and Graph. Jet is a company that produces print heads, and Graph is a company that produces printers. And actually, so in my course, I explain that they agreed, and now I just give some concepts that are not very important, but they agreed to go in a kind of joint research and development alliance to create the page wide array inkjet printhead system. So Jet will create a printhead, Graph will create a printer, so that together they can create a printing system to go onto the market. And so they will do that together. So they need to sign an alliance contract. And in the case that the EMBA students need to do, they actually will be divided in 2 groups. So they have to negotiate with each other, and they actually have to negotiate 3 specific clauses. So they have to negotiate about intellectual property. And so how will the intellectual property be divided between the 2 partners? Future revenue streams, so who is getting how much money from printing systems that have been solved, and what kind of collaboration will they have? How intensively will they collaborate? To what extent will they exchange information? So these are 3 contractual clauses that my students need to kind of negotiate. And there are some conflicting interests. Yeah, so I give them background information about the 2 partners and their wishes. So for instance, Jet wants to get what is called a 10% royalty on the ink in the printing system, whereas Graph actually does not want to give that kind of royalty. Jet only wants to give Graph a preferential partner status, whereas Graph actually wants to get an exclusive partner status. Yeah? So the starting point of the negotiation is 2 partners that have different wishes, different expectations, and now they have to negotiate and come to a compromise. And so in my course, the students then spend like 3 hours discussing with each other, negotiating in multiple rounds to finally come to a consensus contract. And so what I tried some weeks ago was actually to see, can actually ChatGPT do this? So if I ask ChatGPT to do the negotiations and to find a kind of consensus contract, is ChatGPT able to do so? So let me show you the prompts that I used to check this out. So I will now go again to my prompts. This is one that I already prepared. So let me briefly go to the top here so that you can see what I prompted. So again, the same system. So in the prompt, what am I saying? You are a lawyer to write partnership contracts for the co-development of the page-wide array inkjet printhead between the company Jet and the electric imaging division of Graph. And it's important that you clearly stipulate 3 clauses, and these are the clauses that they had to negotiate. Below, you find the wishes and considerations of both partners. Try to find a good compromise between the wishes and considerations of both partners when writing the contracts. And then in the prompt, I just give all the contextual information that I showed you on the slide before. So I give ChatGPT quite some information about what the 2 partners want, and I instruct ChatGPT, create me a compromise. So let me see, or let me show you what ChatGPT then subsequently created. So this was all kinds of inputs. So you see, it really uses the template of a traditional contract, where it first gives some kind of general information and what will be the scope of the partnership. But then you see indeed, okay, it formulates an intellectual property clause, where it's saying, okay, intellectual property, including patents related to the inkjet printhead, shall belong to Jet, whereas all intellectual property related to the printer shall belong to Graph. And Jet also will grant Graph a non-exclusive royalty-bearing license. Yeah? So actually quite sophisticated clauses here about intellectual property. Also in terms of revenue allocation. So in the end, Graph, according to ChatGPT, only gets preferential status, and Graph needs to pay a royalty of 10% to Jet, which actually makes sense because in the context that I gave it a bit more kind of power to Jet, so that in the compromise, Jet has a bit more favorable conditions makes sense. Yeah, so what you see here is by prompting and giving it a lot of information, it's actually able to create quite a professional contract. And I can tell you, because I had access to the original contract of this particular case, so this is a real case, and I had access to the real contract. And actually, these clauses are very, very similar to the clauses that were actually negotiated by the partners. So that I already found quite amazing to see. And then I pushed it one more step. So what I subsequently did was to prompt and say, okay, now you need to rewrite the contract, but now take into account that Jet is the most powerful partner in the negotiations with the most bargaining power to get a good deal. So now I clearly indicate to them, okay, now rewrite the contract. Now it's not about a compromise, but now we are talking about a contractual negotiation where one partner clearly has a dominant bargaining power position. And then you see that it creates a new contract. And indeed, what you will see, for instance, is that in the prior contract, Jet received a 10% royalty, and now it even gets a 15% royalty. And in the prior contract, Graph received a 5% discount, and now it only gets a 3% discount. And also in the intellectual property rights, now Jet gets suddenly a majority interest in some of the intellectual property. So you see that ChatGPT is able, based on you defining bargaining power, to adjust the contract, highlighting on which kind of dimensions you have opportunities to negotiate. So I think this is quite interesting when you have to negotiate contracts, or for instance, if you have to negotiate about your wage with your boss, you can actually simulate in ChatGPT how this negotiation will be. Because you can formulate your wishes, you can think about the expectations that your boss will have, you can play around with the bargaining power, and based on that, actually ChatGPT can give you quite a nice simulation about what are the kind of rooms of negotiation that you have in that kind of circumstances. So I think this is quite an interesting use case for everybody that once in a while needs to negotiate with customers or suppliers or partners or with people within the organization, because you now can actually prepare your negotiations by simulating it in ChatGPT. So that's why I wanted to show you this case where it's clear. Here with the prompting, we go already in a more advanced setting. And to be honest, here, ChatGPT 4 is much better than 3.5. So if you want to do this, it makes sense to have access to GPT 4 and not 3.5. So there you could really see a difference in the quality of the outcomes. Okay, so that was a second use case that I wanted to show you. So let me go back to the slides and to a third use case that I briefly want to illustrate. So a third use case is about identifying and analyzing competitors. So for a lot of companies, especially startups, it's important to know who are my competitors and what are my competitors doing good, where are they maybe not well performing, and how could I differentiate from my competitors. So this is an exercise, for instance, we typically do in our accelerator. So every year we have an accelerator with 8 startup teams. And this, for instance, is a team from the accelerator of last year, Honest Dog. Honest Dog is a startup that has created a platform where consumers can buy dogs from ethical breeders. So if you want to buy a dog, it's often difficult to get access to a good breeder. And so they want to solve that pain point by launching a platform where consumers and ethical breeders can be connected to each other. So then, of course, it's important to know, okay, who are my competitors? Are there already companies doing similar business activities? And as mentioned before, ChatGPT is not really a good tool to search for factual competitors, because that's not how it's trained. So in this case, actually, a tool that makes much more sense is to use the Bing chat. So Bing, you know, from Microsoft, has a partnership with ChatGPT, but so Bing has created its own chat. But this chat does not only use the large language model, but also is able to search on the internet. And so in that way, if you need factual information, actually this tool might be much more convenient. And so you see the kind of user interface looks quite similar to ChatGPT. So again, you can also prompt it. So what we can do now is to enter a prompt, and I prepared the prompt already. So let me just enter it. So what you can say is, okay, you are a company scout that needs to identify competitors. I'm the founder of Honest Dog. And here is a description of the company. Honest Dog is a market platform that allows customers to buy dogs from ethical breeders. Please find companies with a similar description. For the identified companies, provide a description, their location, founder names, and websites. Provide the output in table format. Yeah, so as we discussed before, it's always the same logic. Who is GPT? Who am I? What do I expect? What should it report? How should it report it? So let's see what it does. So now it starts generating the response. And you see it's now not, it's also searching on the internet. Yeah? So that's why it's saying here, searching for market platforms. And then it starts to identify. So it's now identifying a company called Good Dog, Pupper. And you see it also gives you immediately the website of the company, who has founded it. We have breeder. So these are 3 examples of companies that Bing Chat immediately has identified. So my recommendation is always, if you need to do factual searches, I would always go for Bing Chat instead of ChatGPT, or recently BART has been introduced by Google. Also, they have integrated some search things. So I think these tools are better if you want to search for factual information. And so now we know the competitors of eDogs, but now of course, we want to know a bit more about these competitors. And actually a very nice tool that exists if you want to get more information about competitors is Trustpilot. So let us go to Trustpilot. And Trustpilot is a website that collects reviews about companies, especially if you're in the B2C, business to customer. You often will find reviews about this kind of companies on Trustpilot. And here you can see there are 1,976 reviews of customers about eDocs, which is a potential competitor of HonestDoc. And now, of course, you would like to know more about what these reviews are saying. And of course, here you get a kind of summary, but actually a lot of customers will give specific comments. Yeah? So what they like about it. So this is a very positive comment, but it can also be negative comments. You can have complaints. So this is very interesting information to analyze your competitors. Now, of course, what you could do is go to the cursor and copy paste all the reviews, but that will take you a long time. So optimally, you want to scrape the website so that you can kind of automatically scrape the information from the website. And here actually ChatGPT is very valuable because I'm not a coding nerd. My coding skills are very basic. I know how to code, but I'm not an advanced coder. So if you would ask me straightforward, how should I scrape eDocs? I have no clue. But today, actually, ChatGPT is a very valuable tool in that respect. So if we go to ChatGPT, what you can ask it is to say, okay, let me go to the beginning here that you can see it. Provide me Python code that I need to scrape reviewers from the company eDocs from Trustpilot. Yeah? So a very straightforward prompt here, actually, because code is something that ChatGPT really loves. That's a language it really loves. And then you see, okay, it gives me a full code that allows me to scrape Trustpilot. And then you see you have here even the option that you can simply copy code, put it in your Python environment, and then you will have to do some small changes. For instance, of course, you will have to replace the company name, in this case by eDocs. But then actually, in my experience, this code tends to be very good. So most of the time, you will then just have to run the code and it will work perfectly. So in that way, you then have quite sophisticated code to scrape the competitor from Trustpilot. So what do you then get in the end? If you do the scraping, in the end, what you then get is, for instance, an Excel sheet where you have simply all the reviews of different people together, also with their rating. Yeah? So now you can start analyzing the comments that people have given. In the past, you would do that by doing a kind of coding, go through the comments yourself. But again, nowadays, GPT comes to the rescue here, because actually GPT can do the analysis for you. So let me show you how you can do that. So now we go to another chat, and always the same principle. So what do? We say, okay, ChatGPT, you are responsible for the evaluation of customer reviews. I'm a competitor of the company eDocs, and I want to get a good understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of eDocs based on the following customer reviews. And so what have I simply done here? I have copy-pasted like 50 reviews into the prompt. I cannot copy-paste all 2,000 in the prompt because there are limits to the amount of words you can have in the prompt, but like 50 reviews is nowadays possible. So you just put the reviews into the prompt, give it an instruction, and then you ask it to generate an outcome. And so what is the outcome? Again, I asked it to do it in a kind of table format. So based on these reviews, it now highlights the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of my competitor. So in a few seconds, you have a very nice SWOT analysis of a competitor based on customer reviews. And then you can take the next step, of course, and also ask, and give me now some recommendations based on the SWOT analysis about how to improve the platform. And then it will give you a bunch of recommendations that you can use to kind of differentiate yourself from this competitor. Yeah, so you see that we today have tools to identify competitors, get in-depth information about these competitors, and then ChatGPT can actually help you to give you a first in-depth analysis of the data that you have collected on your competitor, and can even give you recommendations to do so. Now, I told you an important limitation is here that you can just prompt like 50 reviews into this kind of prompts. Now, actually, and this is really a recent development, today it also becomes possible to actually create your own language model based on ChatGPT, what is called fine-tuning. So what you will do here as a first step, and this is what I did here, and this is so the coding in Google Colab. So this is a bit technical, but I will try to explain what it means. As you see here, I have an eDocs reviews text file. So this is a text file where I simply had all these 2000 reviews that I had scraped from the website. And as a first step, I actually now use these 2000 reviews to generate my own language model based on ChatGPT. That sounds very complex. It's actually not. It's just following the instructions here, and it's like 3 clicks on your mouse. Yeah? So it sounds very complex. It's not. And then you have actually created your own language model with these 2000 reviews. And then again, you can start prompting your own language model. So then I can again ask, okay, what are the most important weaknesses of the company eDocs? And then it will generate the core weaknesses, but now not based on 50 reviews, but now based on 2000 reviews. So I think this is quite recent, and this is very promising. So you can actually upload a lot of documents in a system, train it as a language model, and then you can start prompting your own data. Yeah? And the good thing is that this language model will not be on the internet. It will be on your computer. So if you have confidential data, it will stay confidential because this is local data that you train yourself. So this is not data that OpenAI can access. So if you have confidential data, a lot of confidential data, you can create your own model and then start prompting it as we have done before. So I think this is a very powerful tool and a very important tool, I think, for a lot of companies that can be very helpful. Okay, so that was the third use case that I wanted to show. So let me go to the fourth use case. And again, this is related to the topic of entrepreneurship. So as mentioned before, at WHU, we do a lot of teaching on entrepreneurship, and we are big fans of what is called the lean startup approach, developed by people among Alex Osterwalder. We even did a podcast recently with him. So if you want to know a bit more about lean startup approach, this might be an interesting podcast to listen to. But so what is the logic of the lean startup approach? It's about you start from a problem. If you have found an interesting problem, you generate a value proposition, so a solution. Then you summarize the value proposition into a value proposition canvas. And subsequently, you have to think about, given this value proposition canvas, what are the most important hypotheses that I need to test? Then you need to test them with experiments, and then you can adjust your business model based on the results of the experiments. So that's the typical approach we apply at WHU. And actually, you see here, these are a number of steps. And so what I have created is what we call a lean startup agent. And a lean startup agent is actually a collection of prompts that automatically will be executed. And before I go a bit deeper into what that exactly means, let me do a small demonstration. So let me go to the app that I developed. Yeah. So here we have the lean startup agent. You need to have, for this kind of application, an open API key. So here we are not using the interface of open API. We are actually OpenAI. We are using their API. The API is a way that you can communicate with the platform, but you need a key. And this also costs you some money. Now, it's not much. For instance, for running this agent, it will cost you like 20 cents. So it's not that much money, but yeah, you need to have a key and you need to pay for it. But so I have already inputted my key now, and now we can do again the same exercise that we did at the beginning. So job to be done. Let's do again paying and monitoring energy bills. And we can describe the customer segment. Again, let's take family of two adults and 2 children. Let me maybe avoid typos, although ChatGPT is very good in dealing with typos. And then we can just say click. And now you can see that the app starts running. And so the first thing it will now generate is a description of a pain point that it identifies, like we had before. So you see, okay, the hardest part about paying and monitoring energy bills for a family is everyone is using energy responsibly and efficiently. With more people in the household, there is a great chance that energy usage can get out of hand. Then you see it starts generating a solution. So it actually suggests what kind of startup you can create to solve this pain point. So it's about an innovative platform that allows users to monitor energy usage in real time, set budget limits, and receive notifications. So it's now actually has automatically generated a solution. Then it automatically generates the value proposition canvas. So if you want to do the startup, what are your customer jobs? What is your customer pains? What are your customer gains? And so on. And finally, it automatically generates some hypotheses that you would need to test if you want to start this business model. So you see here that it automatically, based on a limited number of input, has generated a lot of information that builds on each other. And so that's an agent. So an agent is a kind of collection of prompts that automatically build on each other. So let me briefly show you how that looks like. So let me go back to my slides. So what you in the end do, you simply kind of code a sequence of prompts where you say, okay, this is the input that the user need to give. Based on the inputs, I create the following prompt. What is the hardest part of job to be done? That's the input of the user for customer description. And you also say, okay, the output of the prompt is the variable hardest part. And then in the next prompt, you use the output hardest part as the input for your next prompt. So then you say, okay, now we do a prompt, create a unique value proposition based on the hardest part that you identified before. And the outcome now is value proposition. And this will be the input for the next prompt, where you want to create the value proposition canvas. So in this way, you can create what is called a chain of prompts. So a sequence of prompts, and then you can kind of automatically execute the different prompts. Now, this is a very basic agent with just a number of prompts. Actually, today, you can create very complex agents. People might have heard about Otto GPT, which is a very complex agent. This is a very straightforward one. You can implement additional tools that it also will search for Wikipedia information or simply scrape the internet. So that's all possible. So in that way, you can actually build very customized chains of prompts for your particular applications. And this is a very straightforward one, but I think it nicely illustrates the logic that you can execute. So I think this is a very promising development that now, by not just generating one prompt, but automating change of prompts, you can create agents that can execute quite complex tasks quite automatically. So I think in that way, this is quite an interesting approach that I think is relevant to experiment with in a lot of organizational contexts. If you want to know a bit more about the technicalities, so I recently wrote a blog about the Lean Startup Agent for the data-driven VC newsletter, quite a prominent newsletter in Germany for VC people. So if you want to know a bit more about the technicalities and actually see the code that I used, and again, it's very straightforward. You don't have to be an MIT engineer to do this. It's very straightforward code. Then you can take a look at the newsletter where you can see the examples. Okay, so let me then go to a final use case that I want to share with you. And this is a use case about how you can actually transform speech or audio into content that you, for instance, can use for social media. So at WHU, I think I already shown it, we have a podcast called the Awesome Founder Podcast. So we interview on a regular basis entrepreneurs, famous people on entrepreneurship. And of course, then we want to create LinkedIn posts that reflects the content of these podcasts. And normally that's quite a time-consuming task. You have to listen again to the podcast and you have to think about, okay, what are the core insights that were actually mentioned? And then you need to write a kind of expert piece and then translate it into a LinkedIn message. So that's quite time-consuming. And actually, here again, generative AI can really help you. And the first step, how it can help you, is actually today, based on generative AI, there are great tools to transform audio into transcripts. And OpenAI has developed its own tool called Whisper. And so with Whisper, and this is totally free, you can transcribe audio from audio files, but also from video files. And again, you need to code it into Python, but here it's really straightforward. So it's really 3 lines of code that you need to execute, and it will give you a perfect transcript. So that's the first step. You can use Whisper to transform audio into text. And then again, we can use that text to go to ChatGPT. And again, let me show you how that works. So let me show you the example. And here again, the logic is similar to what we discussed before. So here I ask it, generate a 500 expert piece based on the below transcript of the interview with Annika van Mutjes from the Awesome Founder podcast. The core topic of this piece should be about how to establish product market fit. And then I just give it the transcript, or in this case, part of the transcript, because again, you have limitations in the prompt, but I give it a part of the transcript that is relevant for the expert piece. So that's the instruction that I give it. And then, as you will see, I'm now a bit too far. Let me go back. So here is then the expert piece that it generates. So indeed, as I asked, it's like a 500-word expert piece where it actually gives a very nice summary about how to achieve product market fit, and based on what I discussed with Annika in this case. So here it doesn't hallucinate, it doesn't make up stuff, because I've really prompted very specific information, and so it relies on that information to write a very nice expert piece. Can you copy paste that and immediately publish it? No, you need to do some fine tuning. You will need to address sometimes some language issues, but in general, it's a very good starting point. And then, of course, the next step that you can do is to say, okay, now we have the expert piece. Now, please write me a LinkedIn post about the expert piece. So then you can say, transform this expert piece into a LinkedIn post that is likely to get substantial traction. And then you see ChatGPT actually is able to make a very nice and engaging LinkedIn post based on the expert piece. So in that way, step by step, in a very short amount of time, you can start from your audio and actually come to a very engaging LinkedIn post. Finally, when you publish a LinkedIn post, you typically want to have a nice picture to add to it. And actually, ChatGPT does not allow at the moment to produce pictures. That might happen in the future, but at the moment it's not possible. But there are other generative AI tools, and a famous one is Midjourney. So from Midjourney, you can prompt it to make figures or pictures or visualizations, but actually ChatGPT can give you the prompts that you can use in Midjourney. So what I have asked ChatGPT to do here, create a prompt to create a picture in Midjourney that can be combined with this LinkedIn post, and then it will actually write for me a prompt that I subsequently can copy paste into Midjourney so that Midjourney can create a picture. And just to show you how that looks like, I have to go back to my slides now. So what you see here, this is Midjourney. Actually, to use Midjourney, you need to go to their Discord channel. If you don't know what Discord is, ask your 10-year-old son or daughter. They will know, because it's very popular among teens to chat with each other. But so Midjourney has a Discord channel, and in that Discord channel, you have to again have a subscription. You can then prompt you can enter your prompt, and then it will create nice images that you can use for your LinkedIn post. Yeah? So in that way, with a number of steps, using some different tools, you can today very nicely use an audio file that you have created, and think about also a transcript of a meeting at your work, or if you actually have been talking with yourself about an idea that you had, you can use that audio and easily transform it into a LinkedIn post with a nice picture based on Midjourney. So also this I think is quite a nice use case. Okay, so these are actually the use cases that I wanted to demonstrate, and these are just 5 use cases that I do. There are plenty of use cases, but I hope it can give you some inspiration to think about how could we at our company, at our startup, actually start leveraging GPT for our day-to-day activities. And I hope that in that way, it has been able to give you some inspiration. And I also hope I've been able to show you that it's quite straightforward. Yeah? There is some coding involved sometimes, but that's really basic coding. Yeah? We are not talking here about, again, hiring an engineer, hiring an IT person. With some basic coding, copy pasting, you can already apply even the more sophisticated things that I illustrated to you. So I think here there are a lot of opportunities to leverage ChatGPT in your own business development activities. In the slides, and you will receive the slides because we will send them to you, I also embedded a video about Microsoft. So Microsoft is very busy implementing a lot of generative AI in all their day-to-day tools. And so more specifically, they're talking about Copilot. So Copilot will be the generative AI that they are implementing in applications like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And actually, this is a 10-minute video where they demonstrate what that will imply. So they show you how they are integrating generative AI in Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And I think it's very important to watch this video, because you will realize that in like 2-3 months, when this will be launched, our day-to-day lives will completely change. Yeah? The way we will use Word, PowerPoint, Excel will completely change. And I think it's very important that we are mentally prepared for this kind of change. So in that way, I think the video is kind of a good video to create awareness for the needs for change. Yeah? So I heavily recommend to take a look to that 10-minute YouTube video. Finally, before we go to some questions, I see that there were some questions posted, so we can address some questions. What I want to highlight is that actually we have decided to also do a bootcamp on the topic of leveraging ChatGPT for business development. So this will be a one-day bootcamp for managers, entrepreneurs that want to go one step deeper. So today I have illustrated a number of use cases, but in this bootcamp, I will actually work with you on concrete use cases that you can use in your own company. So this will be a more customized workshop in Düsseldorf, so where we will sit together for one day, where I will do some other use cases that we are using, but also kind of trigger you to start applying some of the insights for use cases specific for your company. So if you want to embrace this kind of tools and you want to get some first experiences, this is an opportunity that we wanted to offer, because we simply see that there is a lot of demand in the market for this kind of workshops. So if you're interested, we are organizing a first bootcamp on June 22nd. Just to show you, so we will do different use cases in that workshop. So it will be about how can you respond to business model disruptions, how can you build and analyze ecosystems for particular projects in your company, how can you fine-tune GPT models. So I will show you a bit more about how you can actually build your own GPT models. And again, I also want to really engage with you in building agents for activities that are relevant for your company. So I promise you, if you do this bootcamp, at the end of the day, you will have created your first agent without having any prior knowledge of coding. So we don't expect you to have upfront knowledge of coding, but during that day, I promise you that you will have a first agent created for your company. That's a bit my selling point, to say it like that. So if you want to know more, you can go to the link that I posted here on the slide. And I was allowed to give participants of this webinar a 30% discount. So if you use the code mentioned here in the slides, you can even get a nice discount for this one-day bootcamp. So if you're interested in that, please don't hesitate to register. If you have more questions, you can always reach out to me. But this is something we would like to offer. It's also for us a new experiment, but I think it might be great to actually help you really kind of experience some of the skills that are necessary to leverage this kind of generative AI models. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you. So I hope this helped a bit in understanding what is possible with generative AI and that you got some inspiration. I've seen that there were some questions, Niklas, so I asked you to make a decision. So
yes,
it's your responsibility.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, we collected quite a few questions. I would suggest that we go maybe a bit use case by use case. And
okay. Yep.
I think the first questions were from this customer interviews from Jan Bodenbach, who was wondering if the quality of outputs from ChatGPT depends on the language that is used in the prompt. So I'm assuming that he means whether you use German or an English prompt, for example.
In my experience, not. For instance, when we talked about another use case, for instance, with eDocs, some of the reviews are written in English, some of them are written in German, some of them are written in French. And so you even don't have to translate them. Actually, ChatGPT can perfectly deal with multiple languages in one single prompt. So that I don't think is a hampering factor. I have at least never experienced it that the output is of lower quality in another language.
The second question was from Tristan van Door, who wanted to know if it's possible with ChatGPT to deploy multiple of these agents at the same time that conduct interviews with automated follow-up questions.
Yeah. So you can, so actually there are predefined agents. So for instance, in LangChain, you can find an agent to scrape the internet. So in your own agent, you can implement other agents. And you can make it very complex. So what I showed was a very simple agent, just a sequence of prompts, but in reality, you can create very complex agents where there are agents within the agents within the agents. So then it, of course, it becomes more complex, and sometimes it can go out of control. So there is this famous Otto GPT, and I also experimented with it. But then, to be honest, I felt it going a bit too far because it started kind of exploring everywhere the internet, and I had a feeling I no longer know what you're doing, and that I found a bit shaky. But yeah, so everything is possible, I would say.
Great. There were two anonymous questions, I think both quite similar. First one, whether it is important to be polite while using ChatGPT, and the second one, whether it's better to ask short or longer prompts, basically. Yeah.
So being polite, so ChatGPT has quite a lot of kind of restrictions. So if you ask it to do unethical things, normally it will not do it unless you are creative in trying to circumvent it. But let's not discuss that topic here, I would say. About the length of the prompts, there I would say always the longer the better. So the more information you input in the prompts, typically the better the quality of the outcome will be. And there the only restriction is that you can only input a limited number of words, although today, especially in ChatGPT 4, it's quite a lot. If you need more, then again, you need to go to this fine-tuning option where you actually create your own language model. That would be the alternative. But in general, my recommendation, based on my experience, is the more input, the better.
Yeah, thank you. We also had a few questions on the confidentiality issues of ChatGPT. So basically, someone was asking how to ensure that confidential information of the partners, for example, in negotiation, would not be leaked to any other parties. I think you already spoke a bit about the local version, but...
So indeed, if you simply use the normal OpenAI interface, I would never put confidential information there, because then there is indeed a risk of leakage. So that I would not do. But so there are already a lot of local solutions. So one solution that I explained is that you actually fine-tune your own model by inputting documents locally. And so then the model is actually on your computer and no longer on the internet. There are also alternative options. And again, now it becomes a bit technical. So there are things like alpacas. So we have OpenAI, you have Llama, it's the large language model of Meta, the Facebook. And actually Stanford has, based on these language models, created alpacas, which is actually a full model, but in one way, one magical way or another, I don't know how, it's only 5 gigabytes. So that's actually an acceptable size to put on your own computer. And then you actually have a fully operational language model on your own computer, where you no longer have the risk that you share confidential information with the internet. So then you can just run it offline on your own computer without any risk of leakage. Now, this is a bit more technical. So even I with my limited coding knowledge, get a bit here in the kind of the limits what I can do. So then you might need to have an IT person that can help you to at least install it and create a kind of interface that you can use it. But it's possible, because to be honest, what I see a bit is that at the moment, a lot of companies have a very conservative reflex saying, no, we don't allow our employees to work with this generative AI because there are compliance issues. I think that's a very simplistic answer, and there are actually already solutions to avoid all these risks that are there. So of course, you should not put confidential information. You should not put personal information in OpenAI, but there are solutions out there to address that issue. So it will require a bit more investment, but it's possible.
I think that is also because you already mentioned some competitors, that already brings us to the next question. Kai Hage wanted to understand how you would evaluate the performance of ChatGPT versus competitors like Bing or Google Bard.
Yeah, so that's a very technical question. To be honest, I'm not, I don't have the skills to give a very nice answer. I can only say on my own experience, at least you also have a lot of open source large language models. And the advantage of the open source models is you don't have to pay for it. Yeah? So if you use them in your API, you don't have to pay. Whereas for OpenAI, when you use it in your API, you have to pay. But my experience is if you start building agents, and especially if the agents become a bit more complex, then these other open source models tend to quickly kind of no longer work, whereas OpenAI tends to work very smoothly. Now, comparing it with Bing Chat and Bard, there it's a bit more difficult. Now, I recently experimented with Bard, and I was actually quite disappointed. I was surprised about the level of hallucination that it still had. My experiences with Bing Chat are quite good for this kind of retrieving factual information. So I always encourage people to use Bing Chat for factual information. But if it's about this kind of language tasks, then in my experience, ChatGPT is still the best performing model, but that's just based on anecdotal experiences. It's not that I haven't done a sophisticated comparison. You can find on the internet all kinds of comparisons, but that's just based on my experience, I would say.
Thank you. Jan Stratman also had a question on your lean startup agent, and he was wondering how open the system is to using data with different languages. So some data in Japanese, Chinese, for example.
Okay. In general, again, I would say if you would type into my agent in German, it would perfectly work, no problem. If you go into Chinese, for instance, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know to what extent OpenAI support Chinese, because to be honest, I don't know. I think Chinese people, at least in China, cannot use OpenAI. So that might also imply that OpenAI does not really support Chinese. So if you go into very exotic languages, then that might be an issue. But if you go into the more standard languages, then there is no issue at all. So at the OpenAI is quite language neutral.
Very clear. We had one question from Marco Kohn, who wanted to know what are, in your view, the most promising verticals or industries to build these integrated agents on?
Of course, for me, the logical targets are things like consulting, but I would think that consultants are getting very afraid also if they see this kind of use cases. To be very honest, I see a lot of disruptive power here where things that typically consultants were doing and were charging quite heavily, you can nowadays do in a very limited amount of time. Or think about lawyers. Yeah, I think I will never again pay a lawyer to start from a blank sheet. I think I will send a lawyer a first contract and say, now you fine-tune it. And that will have huge implications, I think.
That's also a good way to get to the next question. What are, in your views, the kind of risks and opportunities that generative AI brings? Yeah,
and so I will be honest here. We have now talked about the opportunities, and I want us to show some use cases. There are also very significant concerns and dangers. Yeah? I saw recently a YouTube video of a 19-year-old kid that was in a cellar and that had cloned himself. So using some generative AI tools, he had cloned his own voice, he has cloned his own image, and then in the YouTube video, he was simply talking with himself. And you as a viewer, you could no longer make a distinction between the real person and the AI person, of the AI version of himself. Now, of course, you can immediately see the big problems that this is causing in terms of deep fakes. So I think it's a matter of weeks before we will start hearing that people get scammed because they thought they were getting a call of their boss and it turns out to be an AI fake, or that people get scammed because of deep fakes. So I think this is a problem that we are facing very quickly. And to be honest, I don't think we are prepared for it. So I expect that in the coming weeks, months, we will actually face some issues in that respect, that we can no longer trust whether when somebody is calling us, whether it's the real person or whether it's an AI clone. Yeah? And just to give you an indication about the situation, at the moment, when I would have 1 minute of good sound recording from you, I can perfectly imitate your voice with AI. Yeah? So I don't need hours of audio from you, no, 1 minute. So if I have 1 minute, I can perfectly imitate your voice with AI and could start calling you, and you would not, it would be very difficult to hear whether I'm the real person or a fake person. And I think that's very scary. Yeah? So today we are focused on the opportunities, and I think it's important that we realize that there are a lot of opportunities, but there are a lot of dangers and issues that we will be facing in the next months. And to some extent, I think we are not prepared for that. So that will be an issue, I think.
Very clear. Yeah, what in your view is also the best way to kind of credit the use of these tools and be transparent about using these?
Yeah, I think that's also what we tell to our students. If they, so I, for instance, I'm quite encouraging towards my students in using ChatGPT for assignments and stuff like that. But I just ask them to be transparent on when they have used it, how they have used it. And of course, they are responsible for checking that ChatGPT has not hallucinated. You know? So the fact that you use GPT doesn't give you the kind of justification to stupidly copy paste stuff out of ChatGPT without checking. So I think what the best approach is nowadays is to be transparent about it, so that you clearly indicate when you used it, how you used it, and don't use it in a stupid way. I think that's a general recommendation that you can give, I suppose.
Thank you very much. We had just one comment from Dan, who was saying that ChatGPT actually also works perfectly in Chinese. So
okay, perfect.
Somebody has already tried that. I think those were the key questions I summarized so far.
No, but also I think given the time, then I think we scheduled for 1 hour. So that I think makes sense. So then I would like to thank everybody for attending. We had quite some people attending, so that's nice to see that there is quite some interest in this topic. And again, if you really want to take the next step, consider engaging in our bootcamp. I think that would be really a nice experience if you really want to start learning yourself how to do it. And apart from that, don't hesitate to reach out to us, connect on LinkedIn. It's always nice to start building a community on this kind of topics and to collect people that are interested in it. Okay, thank you for attending. I hope you learned something. And as mentioned, please don't hesitate to connect with us. Thank you.